I found the note after the quarterly team meeting, neatly folded and placed inside my folder, just beneath my performance review printout. Get out now. Your boss is against you. It was unsigned. The handwriting was rushed. And the moment I read it, I knew it was Megan. Still, I didn't believe her. I couldn't. I'd spent 12 loyal years at Nova Bridge Consulting, built my reputation from intern to senior project strategist, worked weekends, mentored juniors, skipped vacations, took every blow with a smile. And Cole Maddox, the man I thought was my mentor, was now planning something behind my back? I shook my head, trying to focus on the pristine Seattle skyline through my office window. Rain tapped against the glass, a familiar soundtrack to my thoughts. The performance review in my hands showed the same ratings as always. Exceeds expectations in most categories, with a few meets expectations sprinkled in. Nothing alarming. Nothing that would suggest I was in danger. But that note, those 7 words burned through the paper, impossible to ignore. I glanced across the open plan office at Megan's desk, 26 years old, always impeccably dressed and typically quiet. She was on the phone, her shoulders hunched forward as if carrying a weight. When our eyes met, she quickly looked away. Emily, you got a minute? I jumped at Cole's voice behind me, quickly folding the note and sliding it into my blazer pocket. Of course, I said, composing myself. I'd perfected the art of the professional smile, the one that reaches your eyes just enough to be convincing, but not enough to be vulnerable. Cole was 48, silver gray at the temples, with the confident posture of someone who'd never worried about job security a day in his life. He wore his expensive suits like armor, and his Ivy League pedigree was weaponized in every conversation. Walk with me to the conference room? He asked, though it wasn't really a question. As we walked, I cataloged our relationship in my mind. The late nights preparing for client presentations, the times he'd called me indispensable. The Christmas party 3 years ago when he'd pulled me aside and said, Emily, when I move up, you move up with me. Words I'd held on to like a promise. The conference room was empty now, the remains of the quarterly meeting still scattered across the table, abandoned notepads, half-empty water bottles, a forgotten umbrella. I wanted to talk about the Peterson account, Cole said, sitting at the head of the table. I'm thinking we need some fresh eyes on it. My stomach tightened. The Peterson account was mine. Had been for 4 years. I'd built the relationship from scratch after their previous consultant had botched their merger strategy. Fresh eyes? I echoed, keeping my voice neutral. I'm bringing Jason in as lead. He's got some innovative ideas about their expansion strategy. Cole didn't quite meet my eyes as he spoke. You'll still be involved, of course, in an advisory capacity. Jason Winters, 29, 3 years at the company, charming, ambitious, and, coincidentally, a former classmate of Cole's son from Stanford. I see, I said, because what else could I say? May I ask why? Cole sighed, as if I was making this difficult. Emily, you've been stretched thin lately. The Clark project, the Westland pitch, now the Thompson restructuring, I'm doing you a favor. It sounded reasonable. It always did. Thank you for your consideration, I said mechanically. As I walked back to my desk, the note in my pocket seemed to weigh 1,000 pounds. I spent the afternoon in a fog, mechanically answering emails and reviewing reports while my mind raced. I found myself watching Cole's office, noticing how he called Jason in for what looked like a friendly chat, complete with laughter I could see but not hear through the glass walls. At 6:30 p.m., the office had mostly cleared out. I stayed, as I often did, catching up on work that never seemed to end. Megan was still at her desk too, which was unusual. She typically left promptly at 5 wow. I walked over casually, pretending to need something from the nearby supply cabinet. Long day? I asked quietly. She startled, looking up with wide eyes. Yes. Just finishing some filing. I lowered my voice. Megan, did you leave a note in my folder today? Her face drained of color. She glanced around nervously, then gave an almost imperceptible nod. Why? I pressed. I can't talk here, she whispered. Meet me at Lighthouse Coffee 3 blocks down. 20 minutes. The rain had intensified by the time I reached the coffee shop. Lighthouse was a small, warmly lit refuge frequented by office workers seeking escape from corporate sterility. Megan was already there, tucked into a corner booth, hands wrapped around a mug as if seeking warmth. I ordered a chai tea I knew I wouldn't drink and slid into the seat across from her. I'm sorry, she said immediately. I shouldn't have put that in your folder, but I didn't know what else to do. Just tell me what's going on, I said, trying to keep the desperation from my voice. Megan looked down at her coffee. 2 weeks ago, I was filing some HR documents for Cole. He'd asked me to organize performance reviews for the quarterly evaluations. There was a folder on his desk labeled Transition Planning. She paused, visibly uncomfortable. And, I prompted, your name was on it, Emily. I opened it. I know I shouldn't have, but something felt wrong. Inside was a timeline for phasing you out of the company. The words hit me like physical blows. That doesn't make sense. My performance reviews are being retroactively adjusted, she interrupted. They're building a case. Small issues being documented, client complaints that never happened. They want you to quit so they don't have to pay severance. They? Who's they? Cole, Jason, and Diane from HR. She looked up, her eyes fearful but determined. I've heard them talking. They call it refreshing the team. But it's not just you. It's anyone over 40 who makes too much money. I felt sick. Why are you telling me this? You're risking your job. Megan's eyes welled with tears. My mom lost her job at 53, after 20 years at the same company. They did the same thing to her. She never recovered, financially or emotionally. She took a shaky breath. I can't just watch it happen again. I stared at her. This young woman I barely knew, who had risked everything to warn me. The rain beat against the windows of the coffee shop, and Seattle's early evening darkness closed in around us. In that moment, I felt something shift inside me. Fear transforming into something sharper, more focused. Thank you, I said finally. What happens now? Megan leaned forward. Be careful, document everything, and whatever you do, don't give them what they want. Don't quit. As I walked back to my car, the city lights reflected in puddles at my feet. I realized I had a choice to make. I could either accept what was happening, fade away quietly as they wanted, or I could fight. I just didn't know yet what fighting would cost me. That night, I couldn't sleep. I paced my condo, 12 floors above the city, watching the lights of late-night Seattle blur through rain-streaked windows. Doubt crept in with each passing hour. Was I being paranoid? Had I somehow failed at my job without realizing it? Was there truth to what they might be saying about me? I pulled out my laptop and began a systematic review of the past year. Every email, every project, every client interaction. I created a timeline of my own, documenting shift in responsibilities, meetings I'd been excluded from, and subtle changes in Cole's behavior toward me. The pattern, once I forced myself to see it, was unmistakable. 3 months ago, removed from the Ellison project leadership with the explanation that we need to give others growth opportunities. 6 weeks ago, weekly strategy meetings rescheduled to times that conflicted with my standing client calls. 1 month ago, budget request for my team denied while Jason's department received a 20% increase. 2 weeks ago, my assistant Tara reassigned to help with overflow work in another department. It was methodical, surgical even. I hadn't seen it because I hadn't wanted to see it. At 2:17 a.m., I made a decision. I would go back to the office. I needed to see that folder Megan had mentioned. I needed proof. The Nova Bridge building was never truly empty. Security guards patrolled the lobby, and the occasional workaholic could be found hunched over their keyboard at any hour. I had always been one of them, often staying until midnight, arriving before dawn. My dedication had become such a fixture that my presence rarely raised eyebrows. Working late again, Ms. Carter? Asked Ramon, the night security guard, as I badged in. Deadline, I explained with a tired smile. The work never stops. Don't I know it? He nodded sympathetically. The 14th floor was dark and silent, emergency exit signs casting an eerie red glow across empty desks. I moved quietly, though there was no need. I belonged. Here, at least on paper. Cole's office was locked, but as his right hand for years, I knew where he kept the spare key, taped inside the emergency procedures binder in the adjacent conference room. A small breach of protocol that had once symbolized his trust in me. His office smelled of expensive cologne and the leather-bound notebooks he insisted on using, despite our company's digital-first policies. I felt a twinge of guilt as I slid behind his desk, but it was quickly replaced by a cold resolve. If what Megan said was true, loyalty was a one-way street I'd been traveling alone. I started with his filing cabinet. Nothing unusual in the first 2 drawers. Standard contracts, client information, expense reports. The 3rd drawer, however, was locked. I sat back in Cole's chair, thinking, where would he keep the key? I glanced around the meticulously organized office, my eyes landing on the small wooden box on his bookshelf, a gift from the executive team on his 5th anniversary with the company. I'd helped choose it. Inside the box was exactly what I expected, a small silver key. The locked drawer slid open smoothly. Inside were several folders, neatly labeled. And there, it was right in front. Strategic Transitions, Q3, Q4. My hands trembled as I opened it. The first page was a departmental overview, with budget projections and efficiency targets. Harmless corporate jargon. But as I turned the pages, my blood ran cold. There was a list of names under the heading Phase Out Candidates. 5 names, including mine. All of us over 40. All of us with salaries above a certain threshold. Next to each name was a brief assessment and exit strategy recommendation. Mine read, Emily Carter, 12 years, salary band, A3, strategy, performance concerns, role dissolution, timeline, complete by end of Q4, resistance probability, high, recommend, create documented performance issues, reduce responsibilities gradually, reassign key clients. It was all there, in black and white. A clinical dismantling of my career. A betrayal so complete it took my breath away. I took photos of every page with my phone, careful to leave everything exactly as I found it. As I was returning the folder to the drawer, I heard a sound that froze me in place. Voices in the hallway. Laughter. Coming closer. I quickly closed the drawer, locked it, and returned the key to its hiding place. There was no time to leave the office. Instead, I slipped into the small closet where Cole kept his spare shirts and suit jackets, leaving the door slightly ajar. Through the crack, I watched as Cole entered, followed by Jason and 2 executives I recognized from the C-suite. They were carrying wine glasses and seemed in high spirits. Just need to grab the presentation for tomorrow, Cole said, moving to his computer. I want you all to see the transition plan before the board meeting. He connected his laptop to the large screen on the wall, giving me a perfect view from my hiding place. The screen illuminated with a PowerPoint presentation titled, Department Restructuring Initiative Building for the Future. Cole clicked through standard corporate slides about growth, innovation, and market positioning. But then he reached a slide that made my stomach drop. Transition plan, Emily Carter exit strategy. So where are we with Emily? Asked Richard Barnes, the chief operating officer. Cole smiled, taking a sip of his wine. On schedule. She's already been removed from the Peterson account. Her team has been strategically reassigned. The performance? Documentation is being prepared by HR. Any pushback? Richard asked. She's suspicious, but too loyal to imagine we'd actually let her go. Classic problem with her generation. They still believe in corporate loyalty. The men laughed, and I felt sick to my stomach. What about severance? Asked the other executive, whose name I couldn't recall. If we do this right, we won't need to pay it, Jason interjected eagerly. The goal is to make her position so diminished that resignation becomes the obvious choice. Or, if necessary, we'll have enough documented performance issues to justify termination for cause. Smart, Richard nodded approvingly. The same approach worked with Thompson and Rivera last quarter, saved us nearly $500,000 in severance packages. Cole clicked to the E. Next slide, a timeline with my name at the top, breaking down each phase of my exit strategy over the next 3 months. By December, we'll have cleared nearly $1.2 million in senior salaries from the budget, Cole explained proudly. Just in time for year-end bonuses. They continued talking, discussing the details of my professional execution as casually as if they were planning a golf outing. I remained perfectly still in the closet, barely breathing, as rage and humiliation competed for dominance inside me. After what felt like hours, they finally left, taking their wine and their plans with them. I waited 10 more minutes before emerging, my legs stiff and my mind reeling. As I walked to my car in the underground parking garage, I felt oddly calm. The shock had given way to something else, a cold, clear determination. I'd given Novabridge Consulting 12 years of my life, sacrificed relationships, family time, even my health. And this was how they repaid loyalty, with a clinical, calculated disposal. Tomorrow, they would continue their performance, pretending everything was normal, while the machinery of my professional demise ground forward. They expected me to remain oblivious or at least passive. They had no idea what was coming. The drive home from Novabridge that night was a blur. Seattle's rain-slicked streets reflected headlights and neon signs like a distorted mirror, much like my career had become a warped reflection of what I'd believed it to be. I'd built my identity around being the steady, reliable professional who could weather any corporate storm. Now I was just another line item to be eliminated from a budget spreadsheet. By the time I reached my condo, it was nearly 4 a.m. I stood in my kitchen, surrounded by the trappings of 12 years of success, the expensive appliances I rarely used, the view I barely noticed anymore, the framed recognition awards from the very company that was now systematically destroying me. I opened my laptop and began to type. Every detail, every memory, every slight I'd dismissed. I documented conversations, dates, reassignments. I forwarded key emails to my personal account, careful not to take anything confidential, just evidence of my own performance and the gradual dismantling of my role. When the sun rose, casting long shadows across my living room, I had filled 17 pages with notes. I'd also made a decision. I would not go quietly. I called in sick that day, something I'd done only 3 times in my entire tenure at Nova Bridge. The automated system took my message, and I felt a small victory in this tiny act of rebellion. Then I called the one person who might understand what I was facing. Diana Morgan speaking. Her voice was as crisp and professional as I remembered. Diana, it's Emily Carter. A pause. Emily, it's been, 2 years? Diana had been my closest colleague at Nova Bridge until she'd left abruptly. At the time, the official story was that she'd pursued other opportunities. Now I wondered if there had been more to it. I need to talk to you, I said, cutting through pleasantries. About Nova Bridge, about Cole Maddox. The silence that followed told me everything. Coffee? She finally asked, her voice notably cooler. There's a place in Fremont, away from downtown, Cafe Vita on North 45th. I'll be there in an hour. Diana looked different than I remembered. More relaxed. Her previously signature-tailored suits replaced by a casual sweater and jeans. Her hair, once rigidly styled, now fell in natural waves around her shoulders. Only, her eyes remained the same. Sharp, assessing, missing nothing. So, she said after we'd settled at a corner table far from other patrons, they're coming for you too. It wasn't a question. You knew this would happen? I asked, feeling a fresh wave of betrayal. She sighed, wrapping her hands around her coffee mug. I suspected. There's a pattern, Emily. I wasn't the first, and you won't be the last. Why didn't you say something? Warn me? Would you have believed me? Her gaze was steady, challenging. Or would you have thought I was bitter, making excuses for why I left? She was right, and we both knew it. The Emily Carter of 2 days ago would have defended Cole, defended the company, assumed Diana had somehow failed. What happened to you? I asked. The same thing that's happening to you. Gradual isolation, projects reassigned, subtle suggestions that I wasn't adapting to new methodologies. She took a sip of her coffee. I confronted Cole directly. Big mistake. 2 weeks later, HR called me in with a file of performance concerns I'd never heard about, client complaints that seemed to materialize out of thin air. My stomach tightened. They're building the same case against me. Of course they are. It's their playbook. She leaned forward. Emily, listen to me. Nova Bridge has been doing this for years. They identify employees who've reached a certain salary threshold, usually with years of experience, and they systematically push them out to bring in younger, cheaper talent. It's age discrimination wrapped in corporate buzzwords about fresh perspectives and innovative thinking. That's illegal, I said, though we both knew the law often meant little in corporate America. Proving it is another matter? Diana's expression softened slightly. You always were idealistic. It's what made you good at your job. You believed in what we were doing. I did, I admitted, feeling foolish now. So what are you going to do? I took a deep breath. I'm gathering evidence. I need to know my options. Diana nodded approvingly. Smart. I wish I'd done the same. She pulled out her phone, scrolled through her contacts, and forwarded a name to me. Chloe Harper, labor attorney, specializes in workplace discrimination. She'll help you understand what you're facing. Did you sue? I asked. No. Diana looked away. I took the severance. They offered and walked away. Sometimes I regret it. Not because of the money, but because they're still doing it to others. We talked for another hour. Diana shared her own experience in painful detail. The isolation, the gaslighting, the gradual erosion of confidence that had made her doubt her own competence. It was like looking into a mirror reflecting my future. As we were about to leave, she gripped my arm. Be careful, Emily. These people aren't just protecting profits, they're protecting their self-image as the good guys. When you challenge that, they'll come after you hard. I understand, I said, though I wasn't sure I truly did. And one more thing, Diana added. No matter what happens, remember that your value isn't determined by what Novabridge thinks of you. I had to learn that the hard way. I called Chloe Harper from my car. Her assistant initially offered an appointment 3 weeks out, but when I mentioned Diana Morgan's name, suddenly Chloe was available the next day. That night, I couldn't sleep again. I paced my condo, rehearsing what I would say to the attorney, wondering if I was overreacting, if there was an innocent explanation I was missing. But every time doubt crept in, I remembered Cole's voice. Classic problem with her generation. They still believe in corporate loyalty. The next morning, I dressed carefully for my meeting with Chloe Harper. Professional but not intimidating. Her office was in a converted warehouse in Pioneer Square, with exposed brick walls and industrial ceiling beams that contrasted with sleek modern furniture. It felt honest somehow, not hiding its age or history behind a corporate facade. Chloe herself was not what I expected. In her early 50s, with a streak of silver in her dark hair and turquoise glasses that should have looked unprofessional but somehow didn't. She listened intently as I laid out my situation, occasionally taking notes but mostly just watching me with unwavering focus. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair. You have more evidence than most people in your situation, she said. The folder, the presentation, that's unusually explicit. Most companies are more careful about documenting their discrimination. So I have a case? I asked. Potentially. It depends on what you want. She studied me. Some clients want maximum financial compensation. Some want reinstatement. Some want public vindication. What do you want, Emily? The question caught me off guard. I'd been so focused on proving the injustice that I hadn't considered what justice would look like for me. I hesitated, trying to articulate the feelings churning inside me. I want them to acknowledge what they're doing. I want them to stop doing it to others. And I want to walk away with my professional reputation intact. Chloe nodded, as if I'd passed some test. Then we need to be strategic. Gathering evidence is just the first step. The question is how and when to use it. What do you suggest? Go back to work, she said simply. Act normal. Continue documenting everything. We need to understand the full scope of their plan before we respond. You want me to just pretend nothing's wrong? The idea made my stomach turn. For now, yes. Think of it as reconnaissance. The more information we have, the stronger our position when we do act. She leaned forward. Emily, companies like Novabridge count on people either leaving quietly or reacting emotionally. Either way, they win. We're going to be smarter than that. I left Chloe's office with a strange mix of dread and, determination. The idea of returning to Novabridge, of smiling at Cole and Jason knowing what they were planning, felt like an impossible performance. But I also felt something I hadn't experienced since finding Megan's note. A sense of purpose. A plan. As I drove home, my phone rang. The screen displayed Megan Fields. I pulled over to answer. Emily? Her voice was hushed, anxious. Where are you? Are you okay? I'm fine. I took a sick day. They're looking for you. Cole's been asking questions. He went through your desk after lunch. My heart raced. What was he looking for? I don't know, but he seemed angry afterward. And Emily, she hesitated. They moved up the timeline. There's a meeting tomorrow with HR. I think they're accelerating the plan. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white. Thank you for telling me. What are you going to do? I thought of Chloe's advice, of the evidence I was gathering, of Diana's regrets. I'm going to fight, I said. But first, I'm going to let them think they're winning. I arrived at Novabridge at 7:15 the next morning, earlier than usual. The office was quiet, just a few early risers hunched over their computers. I moved, deliberately, arranging my workspace as I did every day, placing my coffee mug in its usual spot, logging into my computer with practiced keystrokes, a performance of normality. Inside, I was anything but normal. I'd spent the night preparing, following Chloe's guidance. I'd installed an app on my phone that would record conversations. I'd created a detailed log of every project I'd led in the past 2 years, complete with client feedback and measurable outcomes. I'd even practiced my facial expressions in the mirror. Professional, pleasant, revealing nothing. At 9:30, the email arrived from HR. Meeting request, performance discussion, 11 a.m., HR conference room. Copied on the email were Cole and Diane Peterson. the HR director who'd been in Cole's office during the wine-fueled strategy session. I replied with a simple, "Confirmed," then rose from my desk and walked to the break room, feeling eyes on my back. Megan was there refilling the coffee maker. She gave me a worried glance. "Conference room B is empty," she murmured, barely moving her lips. 5 minutes. I nodded almost imperceptibly and busied myself with selecting a tea bag. 5 minutes later, I slipped into the empty conference room. Megan was already there, pacing nervously. "They're moving fast," she said without preamble. "Diane prepared a formal performance improvement plan. They're going to put you on probation today." "Based on what?" I asked, though I already knew. "Fabricated client complaints. Documentation of missed deadlines that weren't actually missed. They're saying you've been resistant to new methodologies." The exact language Diana had described. The playbook was consistent, if nothing else. "How do you know all this?" Megan looked down. "I prepare the HR paperwork. I've seen the file they created. It's all backdated to make it look like concerns have been building for months." I felt a surge of gratitude for this young woman who was risking her own career to help me. "Megan, why are you doing this? You barely know me." She met my eyes directly for the first time. "Because it's wrong. And because nobody stood up for my mother when this happened to her." I touched her arm gently. "Thank you. But I need you to be careful. Don't put yourself at risk for me." "What are you going to do in the meeting?" she asked. I thought of Chloe's advice. Play along. Gather information. "I'm going to be surprised but professional. I'm going to ask questions. And I'm going to record everything." Megan's eyes widened. "Is that legal?" "In Washington state, yes. Single-party consent." I checked my watch. "I should go. Don't worry about me, Megan. I have a plan." The HR conference room was designed to be intimidating. A long table with executives always seated on one side, the problem employee isolated on the other. When I entered, Cole and Diane were already there, files spread before them like weapons on a battlefield. "Emily, thank you for joining us," Diane said with practiced HR neutrality. In her mid-50s herself, I wondered if she realized she was helping build the system that would eventually discard her too. "Of course," I replied, taking the lone seat across from them. My phone was in my pocket, recording app active. "What's this about?" Cole cleared his throat. "Emily, we've asked you here because we have some concerns about your recent performance." I widened my eyes in well-rehearsed surprise. "I see. This is unexpected. My performance review just last week was quite positive." A flicker of annoyance crossed Cole's face. We both knew what the review said. "Yes, well, some additional issues have come to light since then." For the next 30 minutes, they laid out their case against me. Projects where goals were not fully met. Client feedback that was concerning. Documentation of meetings where I had supposedly been resistant to new approaches. Each accusation was vague enough to be difficult to disprove, yet specific enough to sound legitimate. I asked careful questions throughout. "Could you provide specific examples? When exactly did this client express concern? Which meeting are you referring to?" Each question forced them to either fabricate more detailed lies or retreat into generalities. Either way, they were creating a record that would eventually undermine their own case. Finally, Diane slid a document across the table. "This is a performance improvement plan. It outlines the areas where we need to see immediate change, with specific metrics and a 30-day review period." I scanned the document slowly, noting how it contradicted my actual performance history. "And if these improvements aren't met to your satisfaction?" Cole and Diane exchanged glances. "Then we would need to, discuss your future with the company," Cole said smoothly. Translation? "You'll be fired." I nodded thoughtfully. "I see. May I have some time to review this document in detail before signing it?" "Of course," Diane said, clearly relieved I wasn't causing a scene. "We'll need it by end of day tomorrow." "Thank you for bringing these concerns to my attention," I said, rising from my chair with the EU document in hand. "I appreciate the opportunity to address them." As I walked out, I could feel their surprise at my composure. They had expected tears, anger, or desperate pleas, emotional reactions that would further support their narrative of my unprofessional behavior. Instead, I had given them nothing they could use against me. Back at my desk, I scanned the PIP and forwarded it to Chloe, along with the audio recording of the meeting. Then I continued my day as if nothing had happened, methodically working through emails and project updates. At 5:30 p.m., I saw Cole watching me from his office. I gave him a professional nod and continued working. At 6:15 p.m., he finally left, briefcase in hand, his confident stride carrying him toward the elevators. Only then did I allow myself a moment of truth. I closed my eyes, hands trembling slightly on my keyboard. The humiliation of sitting there, listening to lies about my work, my professionalism, my value, it cut deeper than I had expected. For a moment, I wondered if it wouldn't be easier to just resign, to walk away from this toxic environment with whatever dignity I had left. But then I thought of Diana's regret, of Megan's courage, of the others who had been pushed out before me, and those who would come after if nothing changed. My phone buzzed with a text from Chloe. "Good work today. Call me when you're alone." I gathered my things and headed to the parking garage. Once in my car, I called her. "You did exactly right," she said after I described the meeting. "The recording is clear, and the contradictions between their verbal statements and your documented performance history are significant." "What now?" I asked. "Now we accelerate our timeline. They're moving faster than I expected, which means we need to as well." Her voice was crisp, energized. "I'm going to draft a letter, not a formal legal complaint yet, but a detailed account of the discriminatory practices you've observed, with your evidence attached. We'll send it directly to the board of directors, bypassing Cole and HR entirely." "The board?" My heart raced. "That's a big step." "It is, but companies like NovaBridge care about two things above all else: their reputation and their bottom line. Age discrimination lawsuits threaten both. The board needs to understand the liability Cole is creating for them." "When do we send it?" "Not yet. We need more evidence. Specifically, we need to document the pattern. Show that this isn't just about you, but about systematic discrimination. Can you identify others who've been pushed out under similar circumstances?" I thought immediately of Diana, but also of Robert Thompson and Maria Rivera, names I'd heard mentioned in Cole's office that night. "Yes, I think so." "Good. Work on that list." "And Emily," her voice softened slightly, "you held your ground today. That takes courage. Remember that." After we hung up, I sat in my car for a long time, watching NovaBridge employees stream out of the building, heading home to their lives. I wondered how many of them were also targets, how many were accomplices, how many were simply oblivious to the machinations happening around them. For 12 years, I had been one of them. Head down, focused on my work, trusting in a system I now knew was designed to exploit that trust. The realization was painful, but also clarifying. For the first time in years, I knew exactly what I was fighting for. It wasn't just my job anymore. It was something far more important: the truth. The next morning, I woke with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. I'd spent half the night researching former NovaBridge employees, creating a timeline of departures that corresponded with what Diana had told me. The pattern was unmistakable once I knew what to look for. Experienced professionals over 40, all quietly replaced by younger, less expensive talent. I arrived at the office early again, this time with a clear mission. Before I could begin gathering more evidence, however, I needed to sign and return the performance improvement plan. Chloe had advised me to add a simple note: "I am signing to acknowledge receipt of this document, not agreement with its contents." As I walked toward Diane's office to deliver the signed PIP, I noticed a small group gathered in the main conference room. Through the glass walls, I could see Cole, Jason, and several executives I recognized from various departments. On the screen behind them was a PowerPoint slide titled Q4 Restructuring Initiative: more people being pushed out, more careers being dismantled. I dropped off the PIP with Diane's assistant and returned to my desk, my mind racing. If I could somehow get access to that presentation, it would strengthen our case significantly, proof that what was happening to me was part of a larger pattern. "Emily," a quiet voice interrupted my thoughts. It was Tara, my former assistant who had been reassigned weeks ago. "Do you have a minute? For coffee, maybe?" There was something in her expression, a mixture of guilt and concern, that made me pay attention. "Of course," I said, grabbing my coat. "Let's go to the cafe." Downstairs. Once we were seated in a quiet corner of the bustling cafe, Tara leaned forward. At 29, she had been my assistant for 3 years. Intelligent, efficient, and, I had thought, loyal. "I need to tell you something," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "about why I was reassigned." I kept my expression neutral, though my heart was pounding. "I'm listening." "They told me it was a promotion, more responsibility, better career path, but there was a condition." She looked down at her coffee. "I had to report back to Jason. About you, your projects, your client interactions, any mistakes you might make." The betrayal stung. but I forced myself to remain calm. And did you? Tara met my eyes. At first, yes. I'm sorry, Emily. I was ambitious and scared, and they made it. Sound like you were holding the department back. She took a shaky breath. But then I started noticing things. How they'd twist what I reported. How they'd ask leading questions, trying to get me to say something negative about you. And when I couldn't find any real issues, they made them up. I finished for her. She nodded miserably. Last week, Jason asked me to backdate some meeting notes to make it look like you had missed deliverables on the Westbrook project. I refused. She pushed a flash drive across the table. So I copied the original notes and emails before they could alter them. I thought you should have them. I stared at the small drive, overwhelmed by its significance. Why now, Tara? Because yesterday I saw my name on a list of people assigned to document performance issues for 4 other employees, all of them over 45. Her voice broke slightly. Including Martin Chen, who trained me when I first started, who stayed late every night for a month to help me learn the reporting systems. They're doing to him exactly what they're doing to you. I slipped the flash drive into my pocket. Thank you for this. And for telling me the truth. What are you going to do? She asked. I hesitated, then made a decision. I'm gathering evidence for a potential legal case. Age discrimination, constructive dismissal. What you've just given me will help significantly. Tara's eyes widened. They'll destroy you if they find out. Perhaps, I acknowledged, but I think they've already tried to do that. The question is whether I let them succeed. She was quiet for a moment. What can I do to help? Keep your eyes open. Document what you see. But Tara, I added, be careful. Don't put yourself at risk. She straightened her shoulders. They asked me to spy on good people to advance my career. I won't be that person anymore. As we walked back to the office, I felt something shift inside me. Until now, I'd been fighting a solitary battle. But with Megan's warnings, Diana's guidance, and now Tara's evidence, I was no longer alone. That evening, I met with Chloe again, this time in a small conference room at her office. I laid out everything, the signed PIP, Tara's flash drive, my research into previous departures. Chloe spread the documents across the table, examining each piece with methodical focus. This is good, she said finally. Very good. The pattern is clear, and with Tara's documents, we can prove the performance issues were fabricated. So we have enough for the board letter? Almost. She tapped her pen against the table. What we're missing is direct evidence linking these practices to company policy. Individual managers like Cole could be dismissed as bad apples, acting on their own. We need to show this is systematic. How do we get that? The restructuring presentation you mentioned, that would be ideal. It would show the company-wide strategy behind these individual actions. I shook my head. I don't have access to that. It's on Cole's computer or the executive server. Chloe considered this. What about Megan? As Cole's assistant, would she have access? Possibly, but I can't ask her to do that. It's too risky. We're not asking her to steal anything, Chloe clarified, just to confirm what exists. If the presentation includes explicit references to targeting employees by age or salary band, that's important information. I reluctantly agreed to speak with Megan, though the idea of putting her at further risk made me deeply uncomfortable. The opportunity came the next day. I found Megan alone in the copy room, collating documents for an executive meeting. I need to ask you something, I said quietly, helping her sort the papers. It's about the restructuring presentation Cole's been working on. Megan tensed. What about it? Does it explicitly reference age or experience levels as criteria for the transitions? She glanced around nervously, then nodded. There's a slide about experience balance with a chart showing optimal age distributions, and another about salary rationalization for positions with legacy compensation packages. Corporate euphemisms for age discrimination. You've seen the whole presentation? I asked. I helped format it. Cole has a final review meeting tonight with Jason and Diane before it goes to the board tomorrow. She bit her lip. Emily, they've accelerated your timeline again. You're on the list for immediate transition. They're calling it Phase 1 priority. My stomach dropped. How immediate? 2 weeks. They're meeting with you on Friday to discuss concerns about progress on your PIP. She looked at me with genuine fear. Whatever you're planning, you need to move faster. I texted Chloe immediately. Timeline. Accelerated. Need to meet tonight. Her response was quick. My office, 7 p.m. I spent the afternoon in a strange state of heightened awareness, noticing details I'd previously overlooked. The whispered conversations that stopped when I approached. The the way younger employees were being invited to meetings I would normally attend, the sympathetic glances from colleagues who'd heard rumors. At 6:30 p.m., I prepared to leave for my meeting with Chloe. As I was gathering my things, I noticed Cole and his inner circle heading toward the executive conference room, the same room where I'd hidden in the closet days earlier. The restructuring presentation review meeting Megan had mentioned. A dangerous idea formed in my mind. The conference room had two entrances, the main door from the hallway and a secondary door connecting to a small catering prep area used for executive functions. That second door was rarely locked. I should have left. Should have gone straight to Chloe's office. Instead, I found myself walking casually toward the back hallway that led to the catering area. The floor was mostly empty now, just a few dedicated employees still at their desks. No one paid attention to me as I slipped through the door marked kitchen staff only. The catering prep area was dark and quiet. Through the connecting door, I could hear voices in the conference room, Cole's distinctive tenor, Jason's eager responses, Diane's measured HR tone. I edged closer, positioning myself so I could hear without being seen. The board is particularly interested in the financial impact, Cole was saying. We need to emphasize the cost savings of the transition plan. I've updated the projections, Jason replied. By replacing the Phase 1 targets with junior staff, we're looking at annual savings of approximately $1.8 million in salary and benefits. And the severance costs? Someone asked. Diane's voice now. Minimal. The performance documentation strategy has been effective so far. Of the 7 employees transitioned last quarter, only 2 qualified for full severance. The others either resigned voluntarily or were terminated with cause. 7 more people pushed out. Lives disrupted, careers derailed, all to save money and advance the careers of those doing the pushing. What about legal risk? A voice I didn't recognize. We've structured the process to minimize exposure, Diane responded. The documentation creates a paper trail of performance issues, all properly dated and witnessed. And we're careful to maintain age diversity in new hires to avoid obvious patterns. Speaking of which, Cole interjected, where are we with Carter? She's the highest paid non-executive in the department. Getting her off the books would make a significant impact on our Q4 numbers. Alright, Track, Jason said eagerly. The PIP is in place. We have 3 documented instances of failure to meet expectations in the past week alone. Friday's meeting should accelerate her departure. My hands clenched into fists as I listened to them calmly discussing the destruction of my career, a career I had built through years of dedication and hard work. The casual cruelty of it was breathtaking. I wanted to burst through the door, to confront them with their lies and manipulations. But I stayed hidden, listening as they continued outlining their strategy, unaware that their target was just feet away, recording every word. When the meeting finally ended, I slipped back through the catering area and out to the main hallway, my heart pounding. I had what I needed now, irrefutable evidence of a systematic effort to push out older, more experienced employees under false pretenses. As I drove to Chloe's office, a strange calm settled over me. The anger and hurt were still there, but they were now overshadowed by determination. This wasn't just about saving my job anymore. It was about exposing a toxic culture that treated loyal employees as disposable assets. Chloe listened to the recording in silence, her expression growing increasingly grave. When it ended, she looked up at me with a gleam in her eye that hadn't been there before. This changes everything, she said. With this recording, we don't just have a case. We have leverage. What's our next move? I asked. She began typing rapidly on her computer. We're drafting that letter to the board tonight, and we're copying the general counsel. Will that be enough? Chloe gave me a grim smile. Companies like Nova Bridge survive on their reputations. What you've just recorded is a reputation killer. The question isn't whether they'll respond, it's how quickly. For the first time since finding Megan's note, I felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps justice was possible after all. The next 2 days passed in a blur of preparation. Chloe and I worked late into the night drafting the letter to the board, a clinical, detailed account of the systematic age discrimination occurring at Nova Bridge, supported by extensive documentation. In addition to my own case, we included information about 7 other employees who had been pushed out under similar circumstances over the past 18 months. With their permission, Diana Morgan and 2 others had provided written statements describing their experiences. We attached the recording from the restructuring meeting, along with Tara's documents proving the falsification of performance records. The letter concluded with a simple but powerful statement. We are prepared to pursue legal action, including a class action age discrimination lawsuit, if these practices are not immediately addressed. However, we first offer Nova Bridge the opportunity to rectify these issues internally, with appropriate accountability and structural changes to prevent future discrimination. It was sent Thursday morning, addressed to each board member individually, as well as to Marcus Ellison, Nova Bridge's general counsel. Now, on Friday morning, I sat at my desk with nervous energy coursing through my veins. My meeting with Cole and Diane was scheduled for 10 of our a.m., the meeting Megan had warned me about, where they planned to accelerate my transition. Chloe had advised me to attend as planned, to record the meeting, and to say nothing about the board letter. At 9:17 a.m., my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Ms. Carter, this is Marcus Ellison. Please come to my office immediately. 20th floor, East Wing." The general counsel wanted to see me. That could mean anything: that the board was taking our letter seriously, or that they were preparing their legal defense against us. I texted Chloe, who responded instantly, "Go. Say nothing without me. I'm on my way." The 20th floor was executive territory. Thick carpets, wood-paneled walls, and a hushed atmosphere that made even my soft footsteps seem intrusive. The receptionist escorted me directly to Marcus Ellison's corner office, a space 3 times the size of mine with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Elliott Bay. Ellison himself was a surprise. Younger than I expected, perhaps early 40s, with a focused intensity that made him seem taller than he actually was. He gestured for me to sit in one of the leather chairs facing his desk. "Ms. Carter, thank you for coming." His voice was measured, professional. "I've received your letter to the board. I'd like to discuss it with you." "I'd prefer to wait for my attorney," I replied, keeping my tone equally professional. "She's on her way." He nodded, seemingly unsurprised. "Of course. While we wait, I want to assure you that we take these allegations very seriously. The practices described in your letter, if accurate, represent a significant departure from Nova Bridge's values and policies." I said nothing, remembering Chloe's advice. In the silence that followed, I noticed a stack of folders on his desk. Personnel files, including one with my name clearly visible on the tab. "I've been reviewing your performance records," Ellison continued, following my gaze to the folders. "There seemed to be inconsistencies." Before I could respond, his phone buzzed. "Your attorney is here," he said, pressing a button on his desk. "Please send her in." Chloe entered with the confident stride of someone who had faced down corporate attorneys many times before. She introduced herself briskly, then sat beside me, placing her briefcase on the floor. "Mr. Ellison, I appreciate your prompt attention to our letter," she said. "It suggests the board recognizes the seriousness of the situation." "The board has not yet been fully briefed," he admitted. "I wanted to speak with you first, to understand the scope of the evidence and your client's desired resolution." Chloe raised an eyebrow. "Clients, plural?" "Ms. Carter has presented evidence regarding multiple employees. I assume you represent their interests as well?" "That depends on how Nova Bridge chooses to respond," Chloe replied smoothly. "At present, I officially represent Ms. Carter. The others are prepared to join a class action if necessary." Ellison nodded thoughtfully. "I've reviewed the recording from Wednesday's meeting. It's troubling." "It's illegal," Chloe corrected. "As are the falsified performance records, the targeted pattern of pushing out employees over 40, and the explicit strategy to avoid paying earned severance." "Yes." Ellison surprised me by not arguing. "I've also pulled the restructuring presentation. The language about experience balance and legacy compensation is problematic at best. And at worst," Chloe pressed. "At worst, it's evidence of systematic age discrimination that would be difficult to defend in court." He looked directly at me. "Ms. Carter, I want to apologize for what you've experienced. It represents a failure of oversight that should never have occurred." The apology caught me off guard. I had expected denial, minimization, perhaps even threats, not acknowledgement. "What happens now?" I asked, finding my voice. "That depends partly on what you want," Ellison replied. "The board is meeting an emergency session this afternoon. I'll present my findings and recommendations. Your letter outlined some demands, but I'd like to hear directly from you." Chloe gave me a subtle nod, indicating I should speak. "I want 3 things," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "First, accountability. The people responsible for this discrimination need to face consequences, not just Cole Maddox, but everyone who participated knowingly. Second, structural changes to ensure this doesn't happen to others in the future. And third, fair compensation for those who were wrongfully pushed out." Not your job back? Ellison asked with genuine curiosity. I hadn't realized until that moment that I'd made the decision. No, I can't work for a company where this was allowed to happen. But I won't be forced out under false pretenses either. Ellison made some notes. Ms. Harper, what would fair compensation look like in your view? Chloe laid out our terms. Full severance packages for all affected employees, regardless of how they had departed. Additional compensation for emotional distress and damage to professional reputation. And positive references for future employment. And if these terms aren't met, Ellison asked, then we proceed with a class action lawsuit, Chloe said simply. The evidence is compelling, Mr. Ellison. You know that as well as I do. He nodded slowly. I do. And I believe the board will as well. He checked his watch. I have the emergency session. In 30 minutes. I'll present your terms alongside my findings. Can I reach you later today with their response? You can reach me, Chloe replied, handing him her card. And Mr. Ellison, there's one more thing. Ms. Carter has a meeting scheduled with Mr. Maddox and Ms. Peterson at 10 a.m. today. Given our discussions, I assume that meeting should be canceled? Absolutely, Ellison said, quickly. In fact, I think it would be best if Ms. Carter took some paid leave while we resolve these issues. Would that be acceptable? I glanced at Chloe, who gave me another subtle nod. Yes, that would be fine. I'll have HR prepare the paperwork immediately. He stood, extending his hand first to me, then to Chloe. Thank you both for bringing this to my attention. It's not how I would have chosen to learn about these issues, but I'm grateful for the opportunity to address them. As we left his office, I felt strangely hollow. The adrenaline that had carried me through the past week was fading, leaving me exhausted and uncertain. I had just effectively ended my 12-year career at Nova Bridge. Not on their terms, but not entirely on mine either. What just happened? I asked Chloe as we rode the elevator down. Did we win? We made our opening move, she replied. And they're taking it seriously, which is a good sign. But Emily, she added, her voice softening slightly, this isn't over. Corporate legal teams don't roll over easily, no matter how damning the evidence. We need to stay vigilant. As we stepped into the lobby, my phone buzzed with a text from Megan. Cole is looking for you. Furious about canceled meeting. Be careful. I showed the message to Chloe, who frowned. Let's not take the chance of running into him. Is there another way out of the building? I led her to a service elevator that connected to the parking garage, avoiding the main lobby where Cole might be looking for me. As we reached my car, another text came through. This one from Tara. Something's happening. Cole, Jason, and Diane just called to executive floor. Look serious. The board meeting must be starting, Chloe observed. This is good, Emily. It means they're taking immediate action. I drove home in a daze, trying to process the whirlwind of events. After 12 years of dedication to Nova Bridge, I was now on paid leave, my future with the company uncertain. Yet, despite the turmoil, I felt an unexpected sense of peace. For the first time in years, I was standing up for myself, refusing to accept the narrative others had created about my value and my future. I spent the afternoon in my condo, alternating between anxious pacing and moments of quiet reflection as I waited for news. At 4:37 p.m., Chloe called. The board meeting just ended, she said without preamble. Ellison called me directly. They've accepted our terms in principle with some modifications we can discuss. But Emily, there's more. She paused. Cole Maddox, Jason Winters, and Diane Peterson have been placed on administrative leave pending an internal investigation. And the restructuring initiative has been suspended for review. I sat down heavily on my couch. The implications washing over me. They're actually doing something about it. They are, Chloe confirmed. Ellison says the board was disturbed by the evidence, particularly the recording and the falsified documents. They're bringing in an outside law firm to conduct a full review of HR practices and executive decision-making. What about the others, Diana and the rest? They'll be contacted individually with settlement offers. Ellison asked for a complete list of affected employees from the past 2 years. There was a smile in her voice now. Emily, this is a significant victory, not just for you, but for everyone who was targeted. After we hung up, I sat in silence, watching the afternoon light play across my living room. Victory. The word felt strange, almost hollow. I had exposed the truth, yes. The people who had tried to destroy my career would face consequences. But I had also lost a workplace I had once loved, colleagues I had respected, a professional identity I had spent years building. Yet amid the loss, there was something else, a growing sense of possibility. For 12 years, I had defined myself by my role at Nova Bridge. Now, I had the chance to redefine myself on my own terms. My phone buzzed with another text, this time from Diana. "Ellison just called me. What did you do, Emily?" I smiled, the first genuine smile in days. "I stood up," I texted back. "For all of us." 3 weeks passed in a strange limbo. I remained on paid leave while Nova Bridge's internal investigation unfolded, receiving periodic updates from Marcus Ellison, but otherwise disconnected from the company that had been my professional home for over a decade. The silence was both unsettling and liberating. During this time, I reconnected with parts of myself I'd neglected, having coffee with friends I'd been too busy to see, taking long walks along Elliott Bay, reading novels instead of business reports. I slept through the night for the first time in years, no longer jolted awake by forgotten tasks or looming deadlines. Chloe called regularly with updates. The settlement was progressing well. The board had approved compensation packages for 17 employees, identified as targets of the discriminatory practices, dating back nearly 3 years. The external law firm's investigation was uncovering a pattern more extensive than even I had realized. On a rainy Tuesday morning, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. "Emily Carter?" A woman's voice, brisk but not unfriendly. "Yes, speaking." "This is Vanessa Chang, chairperson of the Nova Bridge Board of Directors. I'd like to meet with you if you're willing." The request surprised me. Board chairs didn't typically meet directly with employees, especially ones who had threatened legal action against the company. "May I ask what this is regarding?" I kept my tone professional, though my heart was racing. "There have been significant developments in the investigation. I believe you deserve to hear about them directly from me." After confirming with Chloe that she could join, I agreed to the meeting. 2 hours later, we sat in a private room at the Four Seasons Hotel, neutral territory, away from Nova Bridge. Offices. Vanessa Chang was in her early 60s, with a commanding presence that immediately filled the room. Her gray-streaked hair was cut in a precise bob, and she wore a simple but obviously expensive charcoal suit. She greeted us with firm handshakes, then got straight to the point. "Ms. Carter, first let me say that the board deeply regrets what happened to you and the others affected by these discriminatory practices. There is no excuse for such behavior at Nova Bridge or anywhere else." I nodded, waiting for her to continue. "The external investigation has revealed that the issues went far beyond what you documented." She opened a folder and slid several documents across the table. Cole Maddox, Jason Winters, and Diane Peterson weren't just pushing out older employees to reduce salary costs. They were systematically replacing them with individuals connected to a recruiting firm called Apex Talent Solutions. I frowned, not immediately seeing the significance. "Connected how?" "Owned by Cole's wife," Chloe said quietly, already scanning the documents. "Through a shell company." Vanessa nodded grimly. "Correct. For each employee pushed out and replaced, Apex collected a substantial placement fee, averaging $35,000 per position. Over the past 3 years, they've collected nearly $1.4 million from Nova Bridge." The revelation stunned me. This wasn't just discrimination. It was fraud. Embezzlement. Cole hadn't just been trying to advance his career by cutting costs. He'd been actively profiting from destroying people's livelihoods. "There's more," Vanessa continued. "Jason Winters is Cole's nephew by marriage, and Diane Peterson received quarterly consulting payments from Apex for her role in facilitating the scheme." "My God," I whispered, the full scope of the betrayal washing over me. All those years I'd trusted Cole, believed in his mentorship, worked to earn his respect, while he saw me as nothing more than a profit opportunity. How was this not caught? Chloe asked, her legal mind already working through the implications. The connections were deliberately obscured. Different last names, complex ownership structures. Vanessa's expression hardened. And frankly, our financial controls failed. The board bears responsibility for that oversight failure, which is something we're addressing separately. She turned to me directly. "Ms. Carter, I wanted you to hear this from me because your actions exposed not just discrimination, but actual criminal behavior. The evidence you gathered was the thread that, when pulled, unraveled the entire scheme." "What happens now?" I asked. "We've referred the matter to the prosecutor's office. Cole, Jason, and Diane have been terminated for cause effective immediately. The settlement agreements for affected employees are being revised to reflect this new information, with additional compensation for the fraud component." She slid another document across the table, a letter on Nova Bridge letterhead. This is a formal apology from the board to all affected employees. It acknowledges the discrimination and fraud, accepts corporate responsibility, and outlines the steps we're taking to ensure nothing like this happens again. It will be sent to everyone along with their settlement offers. I scanned the letter, noting its forthright language and lack of corporate evasiveness. It was more than I had expected. There's one more thing, Vanessa said, her tone shifting slightly. The board would like to offer you a position. That was the last thing I had expected. A position? I don't understand. We're creating a new role, Vice President of Employee Advocacy and Ethics. It would report directly to the board, with broad authority to review HR practices, investigate complaints, and ensure compliance with both the letter and spirit of employment laws. She leaned forward. We need someone with integrity. Someone who understands firsthand how systems can fail good people. Someone like you, Ms. Carter. The offer was stunning, a significant promotion with real power to make changes. Part of me was tempted, flattered even. But as I considered it, I realized something important. I didn't want to go back. I'm honored by the offer, I said carefully. But I think my time at Nova Bridge has reached its natural conclusion. Vanessa looked disappointed, but not surprised. I understand. The position remains open should you change your mind. After she left, Chloe turned to me with raised eyebrows. That was quite an offer. Are you sure about turning it down? I nodded, feeling more certain with each passing moment. I'm sure. Nova Bridge was a chapter in my life, but not the whole story. It's time for something new. Any ideas what that might be? She asked. I smiled, thinking of the plan that had been forming in my mind these past weeks. Actually, yes. But first, I want to make sure everyone affected by this gets the justice they deserve. The next day, settlement offers arrived for all 17 affected employees. The compensation was substantial: full severance packages, back pay with interest, additional damages for the fraud component, and glowing reference letters from the board itself. Most importantly, there was no confidentiality clause. We were free to tell our stories. Diana called me immediately after receiving hers. Emily, I never expected anything like this. What we did, I corrected her. Your testimony was crucial. Have you thought about what comes next? She asked. I have some ideas, I replied. In fact, I'd like to talk to you about one of them. Are you free for lunch tomorrow? Over the following weeks, the story broke in the business press. Nova Bridge executives terminated in age discrimination and fraud scheme. Read the headline in the Seattle Business Journal. The article detailed the systematic pushing out of experienced employees and the fraudulent recruiting scheme that had enriched Cole and his accomplices. The public response was immediate and powerful. Former employees from other companies began sharing similar stories. Law firms reported increases in age discrimination inquiries. The state attorney general announced a broader investigation into employment practices at several major consulting firms. Cole, Jason, and Diane were facing criminal charges for fraud, with preliminary hearings scheduled for the following month. The professional community that had once celebrated them as innovative leaders now shunned them as cautionary tales. Meanwhile, I was moving forward. The settlement had provided financial security, but more importantly, it had given me the freedom to choose my next path carefully, and I knew exactly what that path would be. On a bright October morning, I stood in the freshly painted offices of a new venture, Equitable Workplace Consultants. The space was modest but welcoming, an open floor plan with large windows overlooking downtown Seattle, comfortable meeting areas, and a conference room named Truth, in subtle defiance of corporate naming conventions. Diana Morgan stood beside me, now my business partner. Together, we had created a firm dedicated to helping companies build truly equitable workplaces, not just to avoid legal trouble, but because it was the right thing to do. Our first clients were already lined up, drawn by our first-hand experience and the expertise we'd gained through our ordeal. Ready for this? Diana asked, surveying our new domain. I nodded, feeling a sense of purpose I hadn't experienced in, years. More than ready. The door opened and Megan walked in, followed by Tara. Both had left Nova Bridge in the aftermath of the scandal, unwilling to remain in an environment that had enabled such behavior, even with new leadership. They were our first hires. Megan as our operations manager, Tara as our research lead. The website just went live, Megan announced proudly, and we've already received 3 inquiries. And look who's here for the inaugural team meeting, Tara added, stepping aside to reveal Martin Chen, one of the employees who had been on Cole's target list before the scheme was exposed. Martin smiled warmly. I hope I'm not too early. I've been thinking about your offer, Emily. I'm in. With Martin's expertise in compliance and ethics training, our core team was complete. 5 professionals united not just by shared experience, but by a common vision of what workplaces could and should be. As we gathered around the conference table for our first official meeting, I looked at these people who had shown such courage in standing up for what was right. None of us had planned to be here. Each of us had suffered losses along the way. But together, we had found something powerful, a purpose born from pain, a mission formed from injustice. Let's begin, I said, opening my notebook to a fresh page. Not an ending, but a new beginning. 6 months later, I stood at the podium of the Seattle Convention Center, looking out at an audience of over 500 human resources professionals, executives, and employment attorneys. The room hummed with anticipation as I adjusted the microphone. Thank you all for coming today, I began. When we organized this conference on building truly equitable workplaces, we expected perhaps 100 attendees. Your presence here, all 523 of you, speaks to a growing recognition that workplace equity isn't just a legal requirement or a moral imperative. It's good business. The we I referred to was Equitable Workplace Consultants, the firm that had grown from an idea born in adversity to a thriving consultancy with clients across the Pacific Northwest. Diana and I had built something we were proud of, a company that helped others avoid the toxic cultures and discriminatory practices we had experienced firsthand. My story is now fairly well known, I continued, thanks in part to the coverage it received. But what's important isn't what happened to me. It's what happens next. In your organizations, with your leadership, under your watch. The conference was our first major public event. A day of workshops, panel discussions, and keynote addresses focused on practical strategies for creating workplaces where talent and contribution mattered more than age, gender, or background. We had assembled experts in employment law, organizational psychology, and corporate ethics, alongside individuals who had experienced discrimination firsthand. As I introduced our first panel, I caught sight of Marcus Ellison in the third row, now working as general counsel for a technology firm after leaving Nova Bridge. He gave me a respectful nod. Our paths had crossed several times since the settlement, as he worked to rebuild his own professional reputation by championing ethical corporate governance. The panel discussion was moderated by Diana, who had become a powerful speaker on workplace equity issues. Her experience, combined with her natural authority, made her particularly effective with executive audiences who might otherwise be defensive. The question isn't whether discrimination happens, she was saying. The data is clear that it does. The question is whether your organization is willing to examine its practices honestly and make meaningful changes. I slipped out after introducing the panel, heading to a smaller meeting room where Tara was preparing for her workshop on recognizing early warning signs of systemic discrimination. In the 6 months since we'd launched, she had developed a sophisticated diagnostic tool that helped companies identify problematic patterns before they became entrenched. Nervous? I asked, finding her arranging handouts with meticulous precision. She smiled. A little, but ready. This work matters, Emily. It does, I agreed. And you're excellent at it. As I made my way back to the main hall, I ran into Megan, who was directing attendees and managing the logistical details of the conference with her characteristic efficiency. At 27, she had blossomed into a confident professional, no longer the nervous secretary who had slipped me a warning note. Everything running smoothly? I asked. Perfect timing. There's someone here to see you, she replied, gesturing toward a woman waiting nearby. She says, she's from the governor's office. The woman introduced herself as Catherine Porter, the governor's chief of staff. Ms. Carter, the governor has been following your work with great interest. She's forming a state task force on workplace equity and age discrimination, and she'd like you to consider serving as chair. The request took me by surprise. I'm flattered, but I'm not a policy expert or a politician. Catherine smiled. That's precisely why she wants you. This task force needs someone who understands the real-world impact of discrimination, not just the theoretical frameworks. Someone who can speak truth to power. I promised to consider it seriously, feeling once again the strange turns life can take. A year ago, I had been fighting to save my career from unjust destruction. Now, I was being asked to help shape policy that could protect thousands of others from similar experiences. The conference continued throughout the day, each session reinforcing what we had learned through hard experience. That workplace discrimination thrives in shadows, enabled by silence and isolation. By bringing these issues into the light, by connecting those who had experienced discrimination with those who had the power to prevent it, we were creating the conditions for genuine change. During the afternoon break, I checked my phone to find an email notification that made my heart skip. State vs. Maddox et al. Verdict announced. The criminal trial of Cole, Jason, and Diane had concluded after 3 weeks of testimony, including my own. I stepped into a quiet corner to read the news. Guilty on all counts of fraud, with sentencing scheduled for the following month. The prosecutor was seeking jail time for Cole, given his role as the architect of the scheme, with probation and significant financial penalties for Jason and Diane. It wasn't personal vindication I felt in that moment, but something more profound, a sense that justice, however imperfect, was possible. The system that had failed us initially had ultimately held the perpetrators accountable. The final session of the day was a keynote address by a nationally recognized expert on organizational ethics. As I sat in the audience, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought me here. The note Megan had slipped into my folder, "Get out now. Your boss is against you," had seemed like the beginning of an ending. My career at Nova Bridge was over. My professional identity was under attack. My future was uncertain. Yet from that moment of crisis had come clarity, courage, and ultimately, purpose. The very experience that was meant to diminish me had instead become the foundation for something meaningful, not just for me, but for others who faced similar challenges. After the conference concluded, our team gathered at a nearby restaurant to celebrate. Martin raised his glass in a toast to truth that refuses to stay buried. And to those brave enough to uncover it, Diana added, nodding toward Megan and Tara. As conversations flowed around me, I stepped outside for a moment of quiet reflection. The Seattle skyline glittered against the evening sky, the Nova Bridge building visible among the towers of glass and steel. I had spent 12 years there, believing my worth was defined by my position, my salary, my place in the corporate hierarchy. Now I understood that true value came from something else entirely, from integrity maintained under pressure, from courage shown in the face of injustice, from connections formed with others who shared your values. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. I opened it cautiously, then smiled at the message. "Just heard about the verdict. You did it. Thank you for fighting when I couldn't. Robert Thompson." Robert had been one of the names mentioned in Cole's office that night, another victim of the transition plan. I hadn't known him well at Nova Bridge, but his message reminded me of the ripple effects of standing up against injustice, how one person's courage could create space for others to find their own. I texted back, "We all did it, in our own ways. The truth always finds its way to the surface." Returning to the table, I found Diana deep in conversation with Catherine Porter about the proposed task force, already strategizing about potential policy recommendations. Megan and Tara were discussing plans for our next corporate workshop, while Martin was reviewing feedback forms from the conference sessions. This was my new normal, surrounded by colleagues who were also friends, engaged in work that mattered, using painful experience as a catalyst for positive change. 1 year ago, a trembling secretary had left a note in my folder, warning me of betrayal to come. That note had changed everything, not by saving my job, but by starting me on a path to something far more valuable. The lesson wasn't that loyalty was misplaced, or that corporations were inherently corrupt. It was simpler and more profound, that our greatest strength often emerges when we're forced to rebuild, that our truest allies appear when the stakes are highest, and that our most meaningful work may begin precisely where we thought everything was ending. As I rejoined the conversation, contributing ideas for our next initiative, I felt a deep sense of gratitude, not for what had happened to me, but for what had happened because of it. The journey had been painful, the cost high, but the destination was worth every difficult step. In the end, Cole Maddox had been right about one thing. I had been part of a transition plan, just not the one he had envisioned. I had transitioned from an employee defined by a company to a leader defined by purpose, from someone who feared losing her job to someone who created meaningful work not just for herself, but for others. That evening, as we walked together into the Seattle night, I thought of all the people still facing what I had faced. The subtle diminishment, the calculated exclusion, the systematic devaluation of their worth, and I renewed my silent promise to them. You are not alone. Your experience matters. Your truth deserves to be heard. Sometimes, the most powerful words are the simplest ones. Written in haste on a folded note, "Get out now, your boss is against you." Words that had seemed like a warning of an ending but had actually been the beginning of something far more important than the career I had feared losing. They had been the beginning of finding my true voice.